Is it fair to say from both of these current works that the two of you are both preoccupied with time or certain ideas about time?
You're looking at Blake, so I'm going to let you answer.
I think so, yeah. This is on, right? Kind of. It's the low microphone.
We could turn it up. I know Deborah's is working quite
Hello,
well.
hello.
Yeah,
Can you hear me?
Hello.
And mine too. Okay.
Hello.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll just pass it around.
Yeah. We have like two more on the side too.
Yeah, I mean, obviously 3D is very important to me, and I keep working in the format. But I think more about time and construction of thought more as much as I think about images and depth and in an image sense. I guess this movie in some ways began as a way of exploring a kind of an annihilation of time and creating trajectories that moved beyond time or the necessity of thinking about time as the construction of how we're moving through the space and doing that by moving through it in a way that we never really know whether or not a shot that preceded another shot or succeeded another shot was actually shot in that chronology, and so chronology would disappear, and creating sequences that are, a shot is a sequence of frames, and a sequence is a sequence of shots, and a film is a sequence of sequences. And so the movie kind of has just this idea of chronology embedded in it, but I'm still preoccupied with ways of escaping that, despite the fundamental linearity of a single channel moving image. And so you can only really do that with thought. You can't really do that with time, because time is very direct. There's only one way. The film will be the same every time you experience it, but you can maybe not. No? Did it get better this time?
I don't know.
I mean, in a very material way, it will be the same way every time you experience it. There's not going to be another cut of it, but it's the thinking back on it or thinking through it that is malleable. Yeah. Do you disagree?
Well, no, I think it's always in the beholder for one, and so every time you see something, it's going to be different, and I think that's a maybe almost a cinema trope.
It won't be different.
I don't know. It's different every time it's projected. Bigger. There's something different. Material.
I mean, time doesn't exist without experience, so it's going to change.
Yeah.
I agree. I'm sorry. I'm going to be on the other team.
This is actually a debate, not a Q&A.
You're falling through the little trap door now. I'm going to
yep.
No, but you have a chance to redeem yourself.
We can keep talking.
I definitely love time. I mean, it's just a trip. It's not, we don't know what it is. It's like a MacGuffin. It's a mask. It's a camouflaging. Our perception of what it is just so specific to our sensory doors, but human sensory doors, but what time is, if you're not a human, who knows? I think that's what's so magnificent about it. And what's so fun about working with a medium that relies on it is that it's like dancing with the partner who's always going to make really weird moves.
Yeah. And whether that's film, which we know is geologic itself, comes from geology, or whether that's various new media, it all comes from geology and extraction, right? So it all goes back to rocks to some degree. And maybe that's now a segue to you, Deborah.
I'll give you a chance.
But both
to
of
answer
you.
This too.
So it all goes back to deep time to some degree. I know. No, we have. Let me. You want me to? Let me check this guy. Hello. Oh, that sounds better. I think here. So pass. Yeah. Go.
I agree with everything you're saying. I think it's just a matter of where you're placing. I think I'm just saying that the object itself is the same. Of course, perception changes every time we get older. our ability to comprehend something is informed by experiences that happen in between. But I was more addressing the fact that it is the same, but the thought is different. The reflection is different, and the reflection is reorganizing the material object that is very concrete.
To use a rock-based metaphor.
Way to work it in. Wait, did you ask me a question before? And now I forgot what it was.
No,
something about rocks.
It was just a segue to talk about geologic time, which it's the
geologic time. I mean, I definitely, one of the reasons minerals and stones or rocks became a prism to look at the planet or ourselves was just in order to try to see less specific to a human time frame, and minerals, because they've been sort of writing the story for so long now, so much longer than we've been writing stories, and the language that they quote unquote speak in is, I mean, some that geologists can read at sight, kind of quickly, but a lot of us can't. A lot of us don't know that language. But that I was leaning on geologic time in the sense of literally looking at rocks or through rocks to try to understand a bunch of questions I had about evolution and extinction, just small little
human questions.
Yeah, but not just human questions. I mean, species questions, not just our species, but other species questions, just rates of change that we're just not naturally prone to think about because they're so much bigger than what's easy to think about. I don't know. Maybe that's it.
Yeah. I want to go back to you, Blake, and just because your work is so focused on 3D as a device, as a way of looking and representing, and that's at its core. And this film, at least it seems to be, or at the beginning, is looking at nature, or like a somehow mutated form of nature, right? The garden. And I was curious about how you see 3D what it can offer to looking at something like the idea of nature in a different way, representing in a different way.
I mean, I use 3D because I think it looks better than 2D images, and I feel more present with the image as an image rather than obviously there are tons of exceptions, but I feel often when I'm looking at a flat image that I'm looking at a signification, a sign that's pointing to more towards an idea, or it's often used as a way of signifying something, mainly because I'm encountering these images in narrative films which are pre-written before they're made, and so the images are trying to fill in language or stand for language. Whereas I find with 3D, I'm present with the image in a very immediate way, where I'm like, time slows down. To bring it back to time, or it speeds up. I'm not even sure, but it kind of goes away almost, where I feel time passing when I see something that's not three-dimensional sometimes. And so that's kind of the initial draw. I don't know that I feel any particular way about nature. Like, I don't think it's a more realistic image. I think it's just a more present image. And so, I feel like that's the beginning of answering your question, but maybe it's a good start. Okay. I bring my cameras with me wherever I go, because I don't, on that note, I don't preconceive of a film. I don't start from an idea and then collect images in order to fulfill that idea. I just collect images, and the project eventually emerges from that. And I think there's been talk lately about language and experimental film and art in general, and I think a lot of a lot of there are two ways of making work, or there are many ways of making work. But if you want to do a binary, there's starting with an idea from language and building up from that, building images from that. But I've always gone in the opposite direction and worked from images first, and eventually resulted in an end, and then spent the subsequent months and years after finishing a project finding the words to articulate what it was that I made, and finding the rationality for it. I tend to make things that I don't have a rationale for while I'm making it, because I don't really like making things that I know. I make things that I like making things that I don't know. So, yeah.
Could I answer about dimensionality? Yeah. I feel like for me, the reason I love sound is because that's what's 3D. I mean, I feel like with audio, which is half of the film, if you let it be half the film, some makers do choose to make silent films, but that's what allows you to sort of be in the middle of something instead of in front of something. So I'm with you. I get like, oh yeah, I want the 3D experience too, but I lean on sound for that. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's stereo. And more.
Even mono. I really feel like any kind of audio is able to put you more in place than in the middle of something than image ever can.
Yeah, you both have these bleep cuts. Yours fewer per minute, but it's a funny, like, you both have these distinct bloop.
Was Deborah's intentional, or was that just like a real change?
Oh, I don't know. I wasn't sitting here watching the movie. Sorry. Yeah. It might have been a real change. Yeah.
But on the question of collecting that Blake brought up, there's so much collection in your work, in this work. Let's talk about this work. It's kind of an astonishing work of, like, you've grabbed like just so many gorgeous images that are like from space, super close up, from all of these different eras, as well as sounds, as well as voiceovers, as well as text. And maybe you can talk a bit more about that process.
Yeah, I definitely love research, and I love digging, and I love thrift store shopping. And I think the kind of filmmaker I am is more a thrift store shopper. Maybe that's what you were describing too, in the sense of don't always know what I'm looking for, but know it's the right, no, I want it when I see it. Mm-hmm. So when I'm researching, I have a theme. This film had themes about polytemporality and about evolution and about extinction, and about what life is, what is minerals' relationship to life, and this, how does electromagnetism fit in? And in reading and viewing, I'm just like making piles, basically, of stuff that I might use later, many of which I don't. But that's why the list of credits is so long at the end, because the pleasure for me is largely in the foraging, I guess, or the gleaning, as Varda would say, just sort of letting the concepts rise to the surface of anything you're looking at and seeing. Because if you've got a question like that, it tends to poke its way through pretty much any situation you find yourself in, or any text you read, or any film you watch. The things you're already interested in are what come to the fore. So that's part of how I glean the images, and then throwing out what I don't want.
I'm going to guess there are a lot of questions. I'm going to ask you one more just to get you guys ready. You start the film off with
okay.
You start the film off.
I feel ready.
Okay, no, them ready. To get them ready, not you. No, I know you're ready. You're already here to get the audience ready to make their question.
You meant me. I was like,
no. You start the film off with a quote that's something like, all matter has a memory but doesn't remember it. So, or is something along these lines. And then later on you return to like a variation of that quote about, what is it? Like the memory of the, I can barely read my scrawl, but about the ongoing memory of the world. There's this like occupation with not human memory necessarily, but like say mineral memory or non-human memory. And I just wanted to maybe speak about this, maybe parallel or intersecting or occupation with time versus memory.
I think the easiest way to answer that is when I was talking to the geologist, the geoscientist, Marcia Bjornerud, whose voice you hear on the soundtrack, the less seductive sort of world-creating voice, but the more, Wisconsin lecturer voice. She had been talking about which matter has a memory and which doesn't. And she was like, I'm like, well, what do you mean? She said, well, electrons, for instance, they might exist for a really long time, but they don't have a memory of. Every electron looks like every other electron. There's no sign of what it's gone through, and there's no inscription on it. But if you have more complex sets of things, like a mineral, like a rock, then it does start to have a memory of its own past, somehow like embedded in it. And then the chondrite she's talking about, those things remember stuff that came before the Earth, because all the rocks on the Earth have been smooshed and mushed and pressed and metamorphosed, and stuff's happened to them. So their memory's been erased basically by all the processes that have happened to them. So I know that's maybe a really sciencey way to say it, but to me that was an original seduction to think about. I'd never thought about the fact that some particles have a memory and some don't. And what is memory? And then I went down that rabbit hole. But I don't want to go there right now because we don't have that much time.
I want to, but
okay, yeah. I know. Maybe on the rock. Right? Yeah, that's what it's there for. Yeah.
Okay, questions from you all. Yes.
Yes, I think scale is a close cousin of time. The whole space-time thing. And so a polytemporality also is sort of, for me, a polyspatiality. And I don't think this is just, a glib thing that Marcia's saying, to think that there's an ethical impetus to think in a polytemporal way. There's an ethical impetus to think inside of scales that are beyond what we could perceive with our own senses. And so once I started thinking, I think I want to try to work with this idea of polytemporality, engaging that through showing very, 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 very tiny and very, very, very big scales was a big part of the structure of the film, I guess, or the equations I went through in trying to make it. And it's also why a lot of times, I'm going to answer a question that somebody might ask later, but a lot of people have asked, like, why are there breakdancers? What the hell? Where are we at the end? For many reasons, but I mean, for me, I feel like the main thing is, though, at the end, the scale has been so huge and so small that it felt really necessary to kind of, come back to human scale, and I couldn't think of any way to do that more concretely than dancing and choral music, like music that's not electronic, like what the rest of the soundtrack has largely been, but music that's made collectively from our bodies, just super human embodiment at the end. But scale, yeah, I think that's one of the gifts of cinema, right? That you can stretch things and shrink them down. 4.5 billion years and 50 minutes, everybody. There you go.
Thanks for taking care of that.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Oh gosh. Okay. You. Wait for the mic, please. Thank you.
I guess the question related to scale is structure. As you're both kind of foraging, whether it's found footage in Deborah's case or sort of these 3D captured shots, like how are you thinking about how to structure all of this footage, especially as you're playing around with ideas around sort of polytemporality, polyspatiality, especially also if you're thinking about sort of decentering the human from these films. There's a very sort of linear, human-centric way of watching this. So I'm curious how you kind of approach and think about structure for both of you with these works.
Okay, I've got the nod from Blake. Well, I'm a pretty associative thinker. I think that goes through a lot of my works. I'm not I'm not, what am I trying to say? Narrativity is not endemic to my brain, nor like anything causal, really, or like straight liney. So I like when I'm organizing things to put ideas in productive tension near one another. And I know that the cumulative, I mean, of course, you're watching it unfurl in time, and so you're going to receive the ideas in a specific order, but what stands out to you is going to be different than what stands out to Blake and to Rachel and to everybody else. And that's like a more philosophical, I guess, or I don't know, conceptual way of saying it. And then just logistically, index cards. I have like a lot of index cards, and I do that for all my films, not just this one, but especially the more complex ones that have so many ideas smashed together. And I think it started because I originally, for many years, cut on celluloid, and so I needed a shorthand way to sort of see all the ideas at once all around me on a board or on the wall. But I still do it now because I like to notate ideas without words. I think you brought this up before, Blake, but I like to do little drawings that represent each idea or each maybe each shot or each scene, and I can just shuffle them around. So pragmatically, I love index cards. Yeah.
And I tend to begin a film in a very structural way, like in the like Sydney sense, almost like of creating rules for myself, and then making something that follows the rules, and then I inevitably, not strategically, but inevitably will spend the rest of the editing of the film trying to escape the structure and the rules that I imposed on myself in the beginning. And so the first sequence of the movie is following the structural rules the closest that I had in mind when I was in the park filming. And when I was there, I filmed all around the hedge maze in this park, which is in Barcelona in Spain. And then within the maze, filmed every corner, every anchor point, you could say, panning from one side to the next, so that I would have the freedom in the editing to construct a structure of moving through it in whatever order I wanted. Just the logic being that I would always cut to the reverse shot at the end of a pan. And so I took the most direct route to the center of the maze in the first sequence of the movie. And I when I was shooting it, I assumed that that's what the whole film would be, but it was actually quite easy to get to the center of the maze from the outside, and it happened very quickly, and so that wasn't very satisfying. And so I then did another sequence going and allowing myself to get lost, and I was using a very rudimentary, not fancy at all tripod when I was there, and so I was actually having to basically grab the camera and turn it with my hand, and it was very shaky and stuttery, and so I was stabilizing the shots, and certain stabilizations were better than others, and sometimes the algorithm would just drag the image completely off the screen. And so this happened while I was doing the second one, which is why at the end of that sequence the image starts to be dragged off the screen, and then I kind of went with it and started bending it. And so just following these things that were just happening that I thought were interesting or created some element of mystery that would complicate the experience, and then go to another sequence that I felt was going to further complicate the experience that had been built up by the first two sequences, and kind of just allowing the film to deconstruct and retain some degree of mystery, like this desire to know more and to know less at the same time, until I felt like the film no longer had any mystery to offer. So then that's when it ends.
That seems sort of sad.
Sad movie.
It does to us. So we don't have much time left, and I saw two hands. If they're still urgent, so we take them one by one. It was these two, the back row of the front section, and then.
I think you have to put your hand up high.
Yeah, you have to put it back up. Yeah. Okay. And then, if there was another one, then we could take them. Yeah, you two. And then, so one by one, and then we'll wrap it up. Thanks.
I mean, to some degree, you have to follow your own desire as an editor. I mean, I really make my films in the editing, even though this is, I'm my own shooter too, although this is a mix of stuff I shot for this film, stuff I shot 10, 15 years ago that I used as an archive. I mean, I reached back into it, and stuff from other people, from researchers. I mean, there was a few anchors. I knew which may or may not be evident to the audience, but for me, the GOE, or the Great Oxygenation Event happening, which is basically like the planet used to have lots of anaerobes, and then there was a great extinction of anaerobes, or things that don't need oxygen, when things that eat the sun, photosynthesizing creatures, bacteria, appeared, and then they were just outgassing tons of oxygen. So all the other stuff died, and like, woo, life appears. The complex dampness. And so I knew that was going to be sort of in the middle, but I also knew I wanted the fact of the planet's iron core, and that it makes this shell around the Earth that protects us from the solar wind, and that's a big part of why life can be here. That this tie between, the tie between minerals and life isn't about just the mantle and the crust and what rocks we find on the crust, but the fact that the core of the Earth is molten iron and creates this magnetic shield. It's totally cool. It's so cool. So this, I knew I wanted to be part of one of the islands I touched on. I mean, in terms of the individual rocks, it's just sort of, again, me being like, oh my God, that rock looks really great. So and others, because the others I knew I wanted to pilgrimage to, like when Marcia was talking about polytemporality, I thought of those basaltic towers that you see sort of towards the end, which are in the Sierras, but they exist other places as well. And it's just volcanic, a volcanic outflow, if it cools at a specific rate, makes these really big, it looks like, Play-Doh spaghetti that comes out of one of those presses, but it's rock and it's hexagons. And to me, it looks amazing because you can tell it was a process, but it's just frozen. So certain things, other rocks, I pilgrimage to, like the rock house with the wind generators. That's a really sloppy answer to your question, just to say, like, it's a big mess.
There's more rocks left on the cutting room floor.
There's lots of rocks on the cutting room floor. Yeah, they're all over, actually. Yeah.
Okay, last things.
I mean, subtraction's almost too big of a question for me, because I feel like that's one of the primary things cinema is. So at least, especially celluloid, I mean, which, as others have said, it's like stone carving, basically. There's like little minerals on the celluloid, but there's also, it's totally aerated by gaps, by lots of non-things. And I think I'm someone who both writes and edits and thinks really a little bit more in the way of like raga music, or a kind of music where you start a white noise, right? Where all the possible notes are there. And then from that when you see white noise on a TV or you hear white noise, that's all possible frequencies. Or anyway, a lot of them. You can't make out other frequencies. And then from that, it's like I put filters on to kind of distill down to what I want. So I think it's hard for me to talk specifically about subtraction, because I feel like that's very generally the way I work. Yeah.
For me, it's about addition. So I usually will have I will have a drive with many folders and with many pieces of footage that some are captured recently, some are captured 5 or more years ago, and but at a certain point I have a sense that I have enough to have a film, because some inkling will come to me while I'm shooting fairly recently, and I'll just have an aha moment, and so I'll go into the timeline and I'll build a very small fragment of something, and if it's exciting to me, then I'll just start going through folders and see what can go next to that, and so I'll put something next to that, and then I'll go to sleep, and I'll be thinking about that connection, and then I'll look at it the next day, and does it still feel good? And if it does, then add on to it. If not, then I'll just dump it out and go back to it, and then just building like that, and so it's always about, I feel like if I make the movie in that way, in that additive way, that it's the most present that I can be with the film in a moment to moment basis, so that I'm always creating something that feels right at every given moment, as opposed to just having, like, I feel like if I have an idea, as I mentioned earlier, and I try to construct that idea, then I'll be so in love with that idea that I'll make something and force myself to accept that this is the expression of that idea, and maybe overall it'll be a strong idea, but individual moments from that may not work as well as others. But if I'm just constantly building, and every moment has to feel good before I go to the next moment, then that's the only way that I can be satisfied in the end, that the whole thing works.
And you're feeling good, so.
Hey, it works. Thanks all for your questions and your attention.
Thank you guys for your eyes and ears,
and
for being here.
Thanks for your films, Deborah and Blake, most especially.